Hello and welcome to the Inside Social Work podcast. This is episode 11. In today's episode, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking to Clare and we're going to be looking at how to work with women who are victims of sexual assault through trauma-sensitive yoga. So in the studio today I have Clare. Clare has been practising yoga since 1995. She's a certified trauma-sensitive yoga facilitator, a certified Iyengar Yoga teacher, and has completed a number of certificates in yoga programs for children. Clare has been involved in working at Centres Against Sexual Assault since 2000. She began this association working as a counsellor/advocate at CASA House, but her role in the field has now transformed into a role which provides support and healing to victims and survivors of trauma through yoga. Clare has delivered the yoga component of the body-based therapy program at WestCASA since 2011 and at CASA House since 2017. She's also delivered programs in the Northern and SouthEastern CASAs at Counterpoint Young Women's Refuge. In a voluntary capacity, Clare has also provided yoga classes within the Maribyrnong Detention Centre, the Asylum Centre Resource Centre and the YWCA Girl Storey program for marginalised young women. Welcome to the Inside Social Work podcast, Clare.
Thanks, Marie.
So could you tell us a little bit about, share with the audience some of your journey? So you've worked a lot in women's sexual assault and through the CASA centres. Can you tell us a bit about what is CASA and how you got involved with it?
Yeah, sure. So just to clarify as well, the CASAs, the Centres Against Sexual Assault, do work with women and men who've been impacted by sexual assault during their life. So the group work that I do, you're absolutely correct, at the moment is a women-only space as specified by the clients that I work with. But the CASAs, there's 15 centres across Victoria, and these are really specialised services providing crisis support for people who've been recently sexually assaulted, but also providing services for people where their sexual assault is historical, perhaps occurring in childhood or at any time during their life. So there's a team of counsellor advocates that provide that crisis work. There's a 24-hour on-call service, I think in probably all of those 15 regional centres, and also sort of through the day, 9 to 5 during the week, there's counselling and advocacy provided for people who access the service. As you mentioned, as you were introducing me, I worked at CASA House, the centre which is in the CBD of Melbourne, initially as a counsellor advocate many years ago. I then went away and I was focusing on my yoga teacher training. I was teaching yoga. I was still doing a little bit of work in the CASAs, did some work in some homeless women's services, etc. I've had these two parts of my life kind of coexisting. And then in 2011, WestCASA, which sort of provides those same services but in the western region of Melbourne, contacted me. They had a body-based therapy program beginning, and they'd been running it for a little while, offering shiatsu and yoga, and knowing my background, they wondered if I would like to be involved in it, which was a really exciting moment and kind of a pivotal moment, I guess, in the work that I do, because of course I was very excited to do that and to have the opportunity to bring these two really important parts of my world to meet. So yeah, does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. So what is trauma-sensitive yoga? So you're an Iyengar yoga teacher, which is how we met. I saw a flyer for your trauma-sensitive yoga practice at my studio and got in touch. So Iyengar yoga is its own type of yoga.
Yeah.
How does that then fit in with the trauma-sensitive yoga, or are they completely separate? Can you tell us a bit about those?
I would say they're completely separate. My background as a practitioner, when I began practising, was in the Iyengar methodology. And so then when I went to complete my teacher training, I've trained in that style of yoga. when I started to, I think it's important to know, particularly for you guys, and social workers to know that even if you have your own, a lot of people are really familiar with yoga these days, whether it's Iyengar or other types of yoga. There's so many types, that trauma-sensitive yoga is quite specific and is quite different to that. So as I had this opportunity to offer yoga within a trauma context, I was really bringing along my knowledge and understanding about what the impacts of trauma actually are, and modifying what I was doing in that setting, in that yoga studio, in the space at WestCASA, to make it appropriate and safe and available to the clients of WestCASA. So having developed that program at CASA for a number of years, and I realised there was a whole lot of work being done concurrently in the States, particularly in Boston, over on the East Coast, in the Trauma Centre, which is part of the JRIs over there. So they've got a really big focus on social justice, and the Trauma Centre offered, obviously, specialised services to survivors of trauma. And they were developing a yoga program to go as an adjunctive therapy. So they had lots of resources, and I was able to access them and sort of be in contact with the people running that program, tell them what I was doing. They were really encouraging and supportive of what I was doing. It was pretty much in line with what they were doing, which was very reassuring for me, because they're big, they've got lots of funding, they were doing a heap of research, they've got lots of resources, really very exciting to discover them. And then I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to complete a certification in their trauma centre, trauma-sensitive yoga, and that just really, it fit perfectly with everything that I was doing. It gave me that association with them and their evidence-based approach to delivering trauma-sensitive yoga, and it was a very, very thorough and solid course to study as well. Yeah.
So you mentioned the trauma-sensitive yoga was created by the Trauma Centre.
Yeah.
So is that the work that was done by, is it David Emerson?
Yeah.
So he's a social worker as well, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
Do you know a little bit about how that kind of came about, or any of the history of that?
Yeah. So Bessel van der Kolk, which some of your listeners probably familiar with his work, he's a psychiatrist who was really, I guess, instrumental in having PTSD recognised in the DSM, and did a lot of his work with Vietnam vets in order to do that. Sort of that's the background of that. But he was a principal employee at the Trauma Centre, working with survivors of trauma. Had heard about, or I think personally had found out that he had fairly poor heart rate variability. So he was really curious about this thing, heart rate variability and health, and he'd started to read that yoga was really good at improving heart rate variability. And the story goes that around about that point in time, Dave Emerson walks through the door, who was a social worker by background and a yoga practitioner, came in and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in, offering yoga for people who've experienced trauma." And it was just this kind of, again, pivotal moment, and went, "Oh, great, let's do this." And so that was the background, and it was offered, as we do at CASA, again, it was really exciting and interesting, the parallel, offering it within a service, in conjunction with talking therapies, with other therapies. And Bessel van der Kolk talks about sort of the three, with patients that he might see, these three elements that can be offered to them, and the exact balance of them would be different for each individual. But the talking therapy, medication if necessary, and then really, really important as part of that, the body-based therapy that there's a pretty well-established understanding that trauma is held in our body. So the way I see it is, it's kind of this missing, it's been a bit of a missing link perhaps with our history in Western philosophy and psychology about that division of mind and body, that there's this element of it that we haven't been able to get to in survivors of trauma by ignoring the physical body. Yeah. It's
so interesting you mentioned that, because even the traditional talking therapies are often second priority for people, because medication is cheaper.
Yeah.
It's often quite easy to get, so you can get your script, you can take your meds.
Yeah.
So you're not working with the thoughts and the emotions.
Yeah.
And then to add in that third component, it's so helpful for people to see it as I mean, the word holistic gets thrown around often in negative ways. Like you kind of think there's not much research behind them, but in some ways it would make sense because what you've been through is often a physical experience as well.
That's right. Yeah.
And during your sessions, like I had the privilege of joining one of them, nobody has to talk. They're not talking about their feelings, that they just, everything they do is by invitation. And I found that really interesting, having done other types of yoga. It's a very different style.
Yeah, it is very different, and that's very the thing with trauma-sensitive yoga, and particularly in the way that it is has been developed at the trauma centre, is that it's all invitational. It's the language, but the language even more than just that invitational language. All of the language used is very, very intentional. So there's certain Sanskrit words which you would know from your Iyengar practice. There's a lot of Sanskrit and a lot of yoga practices that have been brought over into the West. There's a lot of use of the Sanskrit and this the culture that goes along with it. Can be really triggering for people who we don't know what people bring into the room we don't anyway, really, but particularly in a trauma sensitive setting, what we do know is that they've got an experience of trauma. So my role as a facilitator is to minimise triggers. So yes, it's invitational. It's an experience of being able to make choices, which if we think about the experience of trauma, and particularly, as my client group it's interpersonal trauma, it's often childhood trauma. So it's trauma generally is an experience of having all choice or control taken away. And so particularly in that complex trauma, this childhood trauma, that then can become the way that the brain is wired, basically. And for a lot of people that come along to trauma-sensitive yoga and they're suddenly given choice and control of the practice, find that really difficult. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to... I don't choose. It's really difficult. So there's choice in whether they move, how they move. There's no...
But it's guided choice. It's not like you just say, just sit on the floor and do whatever. Like
no, an invitation is offered.
Yeah, and there's 2 or 3 options.
That's right.
Or to continue doing what they were doing so that they don't have to be stuck by, there's too much choice, I don't know what to do, I'm going to do the wrong thing.
Yeah, exactly. So they talk a lot about sort of A and B choices, A, B and C choices. So it's choosing this or that. What a great way to learn how to make choices when it's sort of, if you think about, often that's something that comes into parenting. You give a couple of choices and then there is that sense of control over the situation, and certainly this sense of control over one's body, which is quite often what has been lost through that trauma of sexual violence.
One of the things you were talking about earlier before we started the recording was, often we hear yoga being recommended to people to, calm the mind and relax, and it's quite meditative. But if you have got an experience of trauma, that might feel quite triggering for you. So you mentioned that some people then go into those classes thinking, oh, cool, this has been recommended, it'll be really helpful.
Yeah.
And perhaps the practitioner didn't know their history or something kind of didn't quite fit, and they've actually left feeling more defeated.
Yes.
So why is that? Like you mentioned the choice, but then there's also... Is it the structure of traditional yoga?
And expectations maybe. So I think another thing with trauma-sensitive yoga, there's no expectation. There is, as you probably remember from the session you came to, it's very, very clear, it's reiterated, there's no right and wrong, because often that self-talk for a survivor of trauma is very negative self-talk about failings and all of those sorts of things. So there's a few reasons, and it is true, particularly through my work in the CASAs, people often have had a bad experience of yoga, sadly, but if they've gone into a class which isn't trauma sensitive and they are, particularly if it's quite acute, their symptoms of trauma are quite acute. Having said that, many of the people I work with would never even have stepped near a yoga studio. So there's all sorts of people. But for those who maybe have gone into a yoga studio, as you say, thinking, even maybe my therapist or a friend or a family member said this would be great, I've got to relax. We know that yoga is good for stress reduction, and then they go in and it's absolutely terrifying for them because they've got someone, number one, maybe adjusting their body, touching their body, making them go into all sorts of shapes and poses and forms that might be really triggering for them, and they've got no control, and then they're told to lie down, be still, relax, close your eyes, all of these things which might be quite an awful experience. They experience it as an awful experience. On top of having the awful experience, they then walk out thinking, I'm a failure. Everyone else looked so relaxed. I knew I couldn't do it. And then in comes that negative self-talk. So we can avoid that by the practice being trauma-informed, by giving choice. You might close your eyes, you might not, but also and you can move, you might not move, you might lie down for your restoration, but you might not. Again, completely embedded with choice, but also explaining and being very transparent with people that coming to a trauma-sensitive yoga class or session isn't all about having this blissful, relaxing experience. It's about practicing making choices, and it's about meeting your body where it is. So that's as simple as it is. Meeting your body where it is might be quite confronting. You might notice that there's pain. You might notice that you're feeling extremely anxious. You might be noticing that you want to get the hell out of there, but you're noticing. And then you might notice that you don't even feel sensation. I work with people that by looking at their arm, their leg, it's like they're seeing their body in the third person, and it's really hard to conceptualise for those of us that don't experience that. But imagine looking at your own body and not even feeling as though that is you. It's the impacts of trauma can be just so devastating, and
And you've mentioned that in the language of the trauma-sensitive yoga, that it's very much like a lot of people you have disassociation with particular body parts, so it's really around reconnecting that. So even the language you use, instead of saying everyone move to the right, it's your right arm.
Yes, there's ownership. Yeah, yes. So that's the other bit of the intention. There's a few things. That's right. The intentional language of it's not the which is, and definitely in the Iyengar methodology, and that's what I was trained in, and I imagine it's in lots of others as well. I just don't know. But lift your arm, straighten the leg, straighten the arms.
And someone comes and pokes you from the back if you're a little bit misshapen.
Right. So even the use of that, we wouldn't use that in a trauma sensitive class, because it's all about, this is your arm actually. So extend your arm if you'd like to. So maybe you could see how it feels to move your foot, and that is very intentional as well. The ownership of the body. Yeah, you're right.
What other things are this trauma sensitive yoga good for? So what can if you've got people listening who think they've got some clients who might need that kind of safety of that kind of yoga. Yep. What other things should clinicians be looking out for that might be worth referring to these sorts of sessions?
Oh, look, I think really the only reason you might not be referring someone to explore trauma-sensitive yoga would be if they are actively suicidal, or have been hospitalised in the last few, in recent months.
So quite acutely unwell.
Acutely unwell. Otherwise, especially if you're looking carefully to see who the class that you're referring to, because to be honest, there's a lot of, there's a bit of a buzz thing. There's trauma-sensitive yoga being offered, and like the rest of the yoga industry, it's not very well regulated, so anyone can go out and offer it. So I would always say to clients, to colleagues, check out who it is, what their experience is, because it may be someone who's done a whole lot of yoga, and credit where credit's due, but if they are not well versed and well experienced in the trauma side of things, it can be, and particularly because we know it can be harmful. It's not just that they might not be that great, it can be harmful. So if they're going to someone who really knows how to hold that space, it's any of your clients that are curious, that maybe feel particularly disconnected from their body, it can help to regulate if there's disrupted sleep, etc. These are the sorts of things that people maybe notice by coming and experiencing yoga. It can, even though we don't necessarily say it, it's great for relaxation. It can, if people do hold a lot of tension and a lot of stress in their body, just by being connected to their body and noticing that, it can give an opportunity for releasing that.
So what should people look out for? So you've got, and we'll put in the show notes the link to the Trauma Sensitive Yoga website.
Yep.
And they've got a list of facilitators.
Yep.
So what sort of questions, so if someone's kind of advertised that they do trauma-informed yoga, but perhaps they're not registered with one of these bigger organisations, what are some of the questions that someone, whether it's a case manager or counsellor or even a person listening themselves, might want to ask about how that's going to be managed and kept safe, so they're not re-traumatised or triggered and then lose faith in the whole process.
Well, for a case manager or a practitioner, a therapist who might be making that call on behalf of their client, which I guess would be a really great place to start, rather than getting the client to call themselves, maybe to start off with, until you maybe build a relationship with someone. I would say that asking them about how their class looks and what informs their class would be a really good place to start. And then looking for words, like just seeing if they, I mean, if you as a worker are familiar with trauma and some of the things associated with trauma, you kind of know the key words to be looking out for. So if they're mentioning safety, and if they're mentioning, minimising triggers, and if they're mentioning, I don't know, like any of those things that make you feel confident, if they start to talk about that there's no, there should definitely be no physical adjustments, no touching in the class or in the session. And to kind of get a feel for that person, I think one thing that I really loved, actually, because it fits so well with sort of my approach generally in the yoga space and in the world, that I loved with the trauma centre training was this sort of mitigation of power. So when I step into a space, when I'm working with clients, because I do work one-on-one, the programs that I run at CASA, it's one-on-one work, and I do that privately as well as the group sessions. I don't posit myself as the expert, although I bring some knowledge about yoga, I bring some knowledge about trauma-sensitive yoga, which it really does away with that sort of power hierarchy, which can be extremely present in the yoga, in the general yoga world, the guru, that guru relationship. So you should be looking for a humility. I guess that's what I'm saying in that is if someone thinks,
which can be really hard, because often we come into it, especially as clinicians. I know for me, there is always going to be an inherent power dynamic and vulnerability. So it's a really hard one to negotiate. Yeah, it really is. It really is. And that's part of the choice of the intentional language in the yoga space as well, is we don't call it a class, we'll call it a session or a practice. We don't call ourselves a teacher, right? Because there's all of these power dynamics, right? Some of them are just inherent in who you step into the room, you're the clinician, you're with a patient or a client, it's already there, but there are things that we can do just in the way we relate to people. So if you were referring to someone, just maybe sort of checking that out. If the person's on some mad power trip, you maybe don't want to be sending someone who's had a life full of, dominating, abusive relationships. Might not be the best space for them to walk into. So what have you found through doing the additional training? Has that changed any language? Like, was there anything that once you did that you just didn't even realise was something you could rephrase and have a better impact? Yeah, well, look, I think that having done the Iyengar method of training, there was a bit of undoing when I did the that's very hierarchical, and very hierarchical levels and seniors, etc. Definitely, and a lot of corrections. I mean, it's all about very, very specific corrections, and definitely the naming of the body as sort of objective rather than subjective is. So it's hard to think back now to before that. Before doing that training, how was I delivering it? It definitely over the quite a few years that I've been delivering trauma-sensitive yoga through the CASAs and elsewhere in community classes, it's changed a lot just by reflecting on each program, always getting feedback from the people who participate. So it changed and developed so much over the years before even doing that. I don't know how much more it changed, but definitely they're so fastidious in that course about language, and the second part of that study of that course is making videos. It was horrendous. It's like my worst nightmare. But it was making videos, having supervisor watch, feeding back to you. Hey, you said not completely finicky, but okay, I've noticed the pattern that you do use you're using that, or you're whatever it might be that they're picking up. So it's very and it's only when you get your head around it that they'll actually pass you in the certification. That's really good to know. Which is great. It's very thorough, and they want to know that it's going to be delivered in the way that they have designed
method of delivering. And they also have changed and tweaked things as they go along, because you go into it. And this is part of breaking down that power structure as well, is being responsive to each one-on-one session that I do looks completely different to the next. And each group, probably even those dynamics, like each week or maybe each different group of people that would come through in a group session, it's slightly different because people's needs differ. Yeah. That is definitely one thing about trauma. You know, there is no textbook.
No, absolutely.
It can be one person it manifests in this way, the next person it manifests almost seemingly the complete opposite. So how do you can't be the person themselves is the expert of that.
I find the language thing really interesting, and it reminds me of a time I did a full day of, it was like a mindfulness meditation workshop, and one person was really triggered by the word surrender.
Yeah.
And just could not let that go at the end of the session. And it was just so interesting, because hearing more about her experience, you can see why that was such a powerful word for her. But it was something nobody else considered. Yeah. And it was just so interesting that what was really calming for pretty much everyone else in the cast was such a powerful thing.
Yes.
And how she had those conversations with the facilitator afterwards.
Which is this is the beauty. There's definitely pros and cons for the group sessions and the one-on-one sessions. Definitely the one-on-one is you can actually ascertain that sort of stuff. I've had a client as well who surrender was really difficult. Like, we just said it once and then it could not be used again. But you know, so you don't get those nuances in a group session unless someone emails. I have had people email and say, you know, when you mentioned for some people it's breath, you mentioned breath, it's just the biggest trigger for me, and then it's trying to, you know, it becomes difficult then try to kind of base the class around maybe what some of those needs are. But yeah, this is it. We don't know what it is for each individual that's going to feel really, really unsafe for them.
So what do you do in your private? So you have a private practice as well in the lovely Yarra Ranges? Yes. And so there'll be details for your website and how to get in touch in the show notes. But what do you offer in your kind of one-on-one sessions?
Yeah, so I work with individuals who might, and often that will be referred through their clinician or through a service that they might be linked in. And so I guess it's sort of a consultation to begin with, meeting them, talking to them, sometimes spent explaining what trauma-sensitive yoga is, getting a little bit of a sense of what they might find useful, what they're looking for, how they think yoga might be useful, what they think they might want to and need to avoid. Although that can change, and I guess with a longer term relationship, you're hoping that maybe what it is about building up some tolerance to some of those uncomfortable responses and reactions, and then we just practice. So it's, you know, my mat, your mat, we're sitting, standing, however it is, and practicing as you experienced in the group session, except of course in a one-on-one setting there's a lot more potential for checking in, for that person being able to say, yeah, okay, I think it would be good if we could do some standing forms now. Okay, yep, let's do some standing forms. How's that going for you? Is there anything that you're noticing? It's definitely not, I mean, it's still trauma-sensitive yoga. It's not a therapy session. We're not doing a whole lot of unpacking, not a whole lot of processing. Not that as a facilitator I would ever shut anyone down if they are wanting to share something, but it's about containing that a little more than opening it up and coming back to the body when that's possible to do so. The talking can be a really great way for people to avoid being in and with their body. So it's sort of, you can see that as a real pattern with some people. It's a real challenge to say, hey, come on, let's see how would that be to just maybe start noticing your feet again. And that's what I mean. Every single session looks really different, and it depends what people can tolerate on any particular day. For some people it might be 5 minutes of yoga actually, and the rest just building relationship. You know, trauma, healing from trauma, and the trauma, therapeutic trauma, it's all about relationship. It's all about building that trust. So if there needs to be a bit more talking initially, there just needs to be a bit more talking.
So you've worked in CASA and in that space for a number of years. Yeah. How do you balance and manage your own well-being. So we know there's always this vicarious trauma and potential risk of burnout and compassion fatigue. Have you had any moments where you've just felt close to burnout that you'd like to share, or any ways that you've kind of kept in check with how you're travelling?
Yeah. It's a really good question, and a really important question, I think, for all of us working in this space. I feel, especially having been in the space where I was counselling, I do feel the trauma-sensitive yoga, using the body-based therapy, I'm still working this one out in my head, because I think we're lucky. I'm lucky insofar as I'm not sitting and hearing details. I'm not hearing the stories. I'm not even necessarily hearing a whole lot about how difficult it is just to be. Some clients will, like some people that I work with will email, and they really share a lot about how hard it is, but often not so much. So we're having a body experience, and so there's not so much cognitive processing necessarily. So the two things that I think that I noticed and think about is that just by being in the space, there's this, when you get into the esoteric sort of side of it, but there's that exchange. I mean, you're sitting with someone else's energy, you're sitting with that person. Yep. And so how do we work with this? I think that for me, the point that I got to is, it needs to then be body work. So I need to make sure I go to a kinesiologist or a massage therapist or a myotherapist, whoever it might be, and I need that to be worked on my body.
I found the energy thing interesting, being in the class. There was something quite deep, like nobody spoke, nobody even really made eye contact. There was a security in being almost anonymous, but then being part of a shared experience.
It's powerful.
And that weighed quite heavily on me. Like I remember thinking, like looking around at all these women thinking, I don't know their stories, but something's led them to here. Yeah. And that's quite sad. Yes. But nobody had to talk about it. So they could participate and connect. Yeah. But be anonymous in their own way.
Yeah. Which is also, I think, makes that much safer for some women. Like group work, sitting, talking about it can be triggered. It's great, but at some times and for some people, just being there. And people are aware, everyone's aware that there's a shared experience. And I agree with you. Like I honestly do believe in that, that the energy or however you want to phrase it, that we bring into the room. And so, yes, some days, and whether I've worked with a number of individual clients or then I'm with a group or whatever it might be, sometimes it's just so heavy. Like sometimes I just feel so deeply sad, and it can be, like you say, that actually the group thing can be very overwhelming. I just find that sometimes just even walking into CASA, like it just hits me. Very occasionally it'll just hit me. Oh my God, every single person that's walking through this door, what is this world that we live in? And that's that burnout thing. What is this world that we live in, that we've got these many months of a waiting list because there's just so many people needing to access this service. This is insane. This is just so awful.
So how have you dealt with it in those moments? Because I imagine going to get a massage and Reiki might be something you can do at the end of the day or the week. And I mean, are there any tips?
Look, I think more often than that, I feel so privileged to do the work that I do and being able to see things shift for people. I think being able to take a bit of a break from the work. I think that the process of checking in with yourself is really important, and just checking in on that work-life, trauma, non-trauma balance. I've got a great reference for a book sort of about self-care, but about self-care in the face of trauma work, which I'll send you
send me that. I'll pop it in the show notes.
Yeah. But it's really, I agree with you. The work that we do, all of us, as clinicians working, it's not just like your everyday self-care. Oh yeah, you just go and get a massage. It's, when you're doing this work, it's like, that's absolutely, it doesn't help us to process actually the depth of being affected by human suffering. A nice little pedicure doesn't sort that. It's nice to do nice things for ourselves, but the self-care comes more from really deeply checking in with ourselves, whatever kind of physical practice, spiritual practice, whatever it is really taking care of ourselves and checking in why we're doing the work. Is this work fulfilling? As I say, for me, majority of the time, overwhelmingly the majority of the time, it's so rewarding that if I check in and go, wow, those moments, I feel so lucky to be able to walk beside people in that journey, that it's completely worthwhile. And I have, I do like working, as well as doing the work privately, private practice, and even the classes or sessions that I run in different yoga studios. Working in an organisation, so working within the structure of a place where there's other colleagues and where you can share what you're feeling, how you're feeling, what's going on. Maybe it's something that happened with that particular client, and just get it off your chest is really helpful as well. It's not great to work in isolation. It mirrors that traumatic sort of dynamic sometimes. So it's, I think, really important to be able to talk.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that would be, we talk a lot about in social work, like supervision and having peers. So even just, like you said, it needs to be that deeper stuff as well. To
people that understand, people that get it. So my area, I wouldn't even say expertise, but my area of experience, for 20 years almost, has been in sexual assault services. I also have done quite a lot of voluntary work in sort of the refugee asylum seeker space. And so connecting with other people in those specific spaces is really important. And whether that's, the crazy black humour that comes from doing that work that only someone else in the field gets, because otherwise it's like, oh, that's just awful. But if you're in, it's a way of coping, definitely a way of coping. For me, humour is, and not in a I don't mean that in a way that would ever be disrespectful, more just the absurdity of life generally, or myself, or whatever it might be, but just keeping that fun. I've got kids, so I think that balance of having that really holds you to account, like checking in whether you've got that balance right, finding the joy in kids, whether they're your own or other people, just finding that light side.
Which I imagine if you don't do well can mean you feel needed everywhere you go.
Totally.
So you can feel needed and depended on at work,
yep.
and then you come home and you feel needed and depended on. So if you're not balancing that, something's going to give over time.
Totally.
And you mentioned a few kind of one book already, and you've there's a few kind of articles on trauma-sensitive yoga, which I can put in the show notes. But are there any other tools or resources you can recommend to, a lot of our podcast listeners are early career social workers or even students, about the kind of work that they're embarking on, maybe referring or thinking about different ways of working with a client's presenting issue or pain?
Well, I don't know if I included it in the things that I sent you, but Bessel's book, so The Body Keeps the Score, is a great...
That is a great book.
It's a great book. And, so any of the, that kind of... the same ilk, there's a whole heap of practitioners from the States that have done a whole lot of really interesting study into and consideration of the body. What is the role of the body? What part does the body play in this work that we do? And social work is broad. It's not like everyone who is becoming a social worker or working as a social worker will be specifically focusing on a particular arena of trauma. But let's face it, like a lot of things that people are presenting with is sort of the surface with the underlying trauma. So I just think being really knowledgeable about how trauma presents and being prepared for it just serves anyone who's working with in the face of people and humans and suffering and complications is just a good bedrock. Because we often, there's a big misunderstanding about it. So sorry, I've diverted.
No, that's fine. So essentially to upskill in understanding trauma, perhaps, maybe even age appropriate, what that might look like in different ages. So whether you need to work, whether you work therapeutically with your clients around trauma, just having an awareness of it. Because you're right, most of the people that we see, they'll either have had a traumatic experience, or the system itself can be traumatizing, or sitting with that pain and discomfort while they're on a wait list. Like, there are so many things. So we are seeing a population of people who are highly traumatized.
And just holding space for for those people is just in itself so healing. Just to I'm working with someone at the moment, and she just keeps saying, I'm so glad that I really feel like it's taken a very long time to build trust together, but she really feels that I get it, and it's so valuable for someone, especially if it's really complex, their trauma, and it doesn't make sense, and they feel like they're mad half the time, to get someone who just says, it's okay, I don't judge, I don't even necessarily have to understand it completely. But let's not even look for the answers. Let's just be with what is.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I'll put in the show notes your website. So
Great,
for those listening, it's yarrarangersyoga.com.au. And you've got some contact forms there that people can get in touch and see your timetable. So you work across Yarraville and the Dandenongs. So over 2 sites.
Yeah.
And can people contact you if they're going on that journey of maybe becoming a trauma-sensitive yoga practitioner? Do you do secondary consults?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and I really enjoy. As you can tell, I love talking, so I love doing those secondary consults, sort of mentoring type stuff. Yeah, so I'm really happy for people to contact about that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Marie.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for today's episode's resources, and don't forget to click subscribe and review us wherever it is you get your podcasts.